Hi, I'm Selina from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Stella Stevenson, and she is a debut author, and she's written a book called The Trope. And I'm going to let Stella talk to you about what it's all about. Why don't you go ahead and explain it?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name's Stella. I wrote The Trope. It's my debut novel. It is a spicy open door romantic comedy, happily ever after included. And it's about an anxious first time author who's really struggling to put her words together because she has spent so much time reading that she doesn't have a lot of life experience. And so, what better way to get that life experience than to use what she knows from books, particularly all the classic romance tropes she likes to read about, to get some experience and to catch the eye of the man she's been in love with, her best friend's older brother, since she was very little. Unfortunately for Maggie, the main character, true life isn't exactly like a romance novel, so things don't exactly go the way she anticipated that they would, but she still does get her happily ever after.
That sounds great. So, what do you think? What do you think draws readers to these kinds of books?
So I myself am an avid romance reader. I will primarily only read romance novels, but any subgenre they're in. And my personal opinion, the same reason that I choose to write in that genre is because we know how they're going to end. When you pick up a romance novel, you know that you are guaranteed a happy ending and two characters that, whether they're in love for all time or in love for right now, they have come to some place in their lives together. And that for me, I am someone who has anxiety, much like my main character, Maggie. And so knowing that that ending is there takes a lot of nerves off of me. And it provides a really great escape from all the other stuff in the world where we don't know how things are going to end. Um, and it means that a lot of those books, especially the really well done ones, are character driven. It's about who these people are, it's about what makes them who they are, and how that comes together. And so I think that's why a lot of people I know and read romance novels, why I read them, and why I chose to write in that genre. I lovingly call what I write brain candy or spicy brain candy. You know, you don't necessarily need to dissect it. You don't need a dictionary with you while you read it. You don't need to worry about what is being created that you don't already know. You kind of know what you're getting into, you know what's going to happen, and you can just lose yourself in a fun story or a happy story of two people. And so that's
That's about right. Yeah, romance novels are generally like that.
yeah.
Um, so what was your inspiration for the trope?
So for this particular novel, it is actually not the first novel I've written. It is the first novel that I published. So while I was writing the first novel I wrote and coming back to writing after a long time off, I started ensconcing myself in all these like reader social media groups. So there's like Book Talk and like Bookstagram and all these places where people talk about books. And especially in romance world, I imagine it's the same in other genres as well. There are tropes or like classic scenarios that have to happen in the book, and we know what they are, we know how they're going to end, and we know what they mean for the story. And people were recommending books by trope. This is an enemies to lovers. This is a brother's best friend. This is a one bed in the inn situation. And people were picking the books they wanted to read with no other knowledge other than based off these tropes. And I started wondering what would happen if you had someone who thought about applying that to real life, or someone who was writing it and thought about what that would work, how that would look in real life. And so there was Maggie, right? She's trying to write a story and it's not coming together. And as much as I think a lot of times we think that we know we wouldn't do it, we might be tempted to ask our best friend's older brother that we love if he would pretend to be our boyfriend, because in all the books we read, they end up together. And so I wanted to play around with that. And so once that idea kind of took root of her forcing these things to happen because she liked reading them and them not working out at all for her, um, it became this kind of like almost meta idea of what it was like to write a romance novel about writing a romance novel and experiencing these things. And while they weren't working the way she expected, there are still this, I mean, the novel is still full of tropes. They're just not the ones that she thinks they are. And so that's kind of where it came from. This idea of this is what we talk about when we talk about books. These are the scenarios we all know and love. And we think we know how they're always going to end. And what if they didn't end that way?
Okay. So what was what kind of research went into writing the trope?
So I mentioned briefly, Maggie has anxiety. I myself have generalized anxiety. I was diagnosed with postpartum anxiety after my first child was born, and then it never went away, and I ended up being diagnosed with generalized anxiety. So I didn't need to do a ton of research. I did do research on how anxiety can present in different people and what it looks like, because Maggie is not myself, even though a lot of her little experiences with that come from me. But my most fun thing to research for this book is I have a main character who is a blacksmith, and I know absolutely nothing about edged weapons and blacksmithing. But I had to research it. So we watched a lot of Forged in Fire. It's one of my husband's favorite shows. I read a lot of nonfiction books on the subject. I've looked at so many different online websites. I've talked to a couple people who forge weapons in their free time and sell them artistically, and had to learn a lot about at least the process of how you can create a sword with the right equipment, the right safety equipment in your backyard. So that was probably the most fun thing to research.
How did you decide on that as an occupation?
So honestly, it was because my husband was watching a lot of Forged in Fire, which is one of those, like, they bring on contestants and they have to make these weapons and then they test them out to see who's like the reigning champion. And he doesn't forge weapons either. I don't know why this was what he had chosen to watch, but so he'd been watching a lot of that. And there's a lot of nerdy elements in this book. My main character, she works at a comic book store. He plays Magic the Gathering. And so he's a history professor, and in his spare time, I thought it would be fun if he was forging these weapons to recreate different weapons from different fandoms. You know, people can sell swords, but can you sell daggers from Lord of the Rings, things like that. So that's kind of where that came from. I wanted to build this little element in, something unique and different that we don't see a lot of, but shows a lot of strength and a lot of creativity. So yeah, that's where that one came from.
So that was actually your favorite research story, was researching
For this one, yeah.
Yeah.
It was the
Okay. So sorry, go ahead.
It was the most, I think it was the most interesting part. You know, you do a lot of little pieces, right? Like, how does a panic attack feel? Because I know how mine feel, but what do other people describe it as? Or, you know, what is there a setup of mini golf I can use if my characters are going mini golf? Let me pull up like a map of somewhere so I can describe it right. But this was the piece for this book that I had zero experience with, and zero experience with someone like my husband is not a weapons forger. He can talk me through Magic the Gathering to make sure that those details are right, but he can't talk me through forging weapons. So that was the piece for this book that I really had to kind of break out and really branch out of my comfort zone and do a lot of research on.
Uh-huh. So what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out the trope? And how did you overcome the challenges?
Yeah, so I mean, writing a book is challenging. I would say one of the hardest things I think about writing and getting the trope out is that there's no right way to do it. And maybe not everybody feels this way, but I'm someone who needs like a clear list. This is what you need to do. This is the order it should be done in, and this is how you know it succeeded. And there are so many different ways to go about publishing a book. Like, obviously you write a draft, you edit it, you revise it. You have people read it and give you feedback, and then you publish it. But where do you publish it? Who do you go through? How do you make sure your copies are going to turn out? How do you pick a cover designer? And when you choose to do that yourself, I'm self-published, I'm an indie publisher or MD published author. There's no one telling you what's right or wrong. And even when you speak to other indie authors, we can all only talk about what works for ourselves. And what works for my close friend in her specific subgenre might not work for me, and vice versa. So for me, the hardest part was like having confidence every time I made a decision that whatever decision I'd made for what my cover was going to be or for the trim size of my book, which had me in Barnes and Noble with a measuring tape, by the way, like measuring out books in my genre to make sure I wasn't doing something crazy, that I was going to stick by it and I wasn't going to second guess it. And if it needed to change with the second book, the third book, the fourth book, I could do that. But that I was getting myself really tied up in this. Well, what if I'm not choosing the right printer? What if I really should have gone this direction? What if my cover isn't actually what it should be, or I should have hired somebody, or X, Y, or Z? So I think that was the hardest. But the best way I found to overcome it was to find other authors and to recognize that even if we all had different answers for what to do and how to do it, we were all facing the exact same questions. So even the authors that had answers for what they were doing and when they were doing it and how they were doing it could relate to me saying, I feel stuck, I feel frozen, I'm not really sure what direction I need to go next. And they could say, been there, done that, it gets better. And that whatever you pick, it will be okay. Right? Like your choice will be the right choice because it's your book, your story, and how you want to share it. And so that was really helpful.
So you decided to be an indie publisher.
I did. I decided to indie publish my books. I like having the control over it and knowing what is happening and when it is happening. And a little tenet of a lot of the stories I've been writing involves characters that are experiencing things or that maybe have facets of their personality that we don't see a lot in the romance world. Maggie's anxiety, Max blacksmithing and his overall nerdiness. He's not your standard 6'2" hunk of a god of a man. And I was a little worried. I'd heard the horror stories about being asked to change those details with the worry that they wouldn't sell. And I thought that some of those details were important for my story. And so instead of putting myself in a position where I had to worry if someone would say no out of the fear that it wouldn't do well, I thought I'd rather put the story out there and put it out there the way I thought it needed to be told. So
That's interesting. I think that's very brave. I think it's a really, it's a nice idea just to keep it true to what you want. And I think it's great that you have characters that have flaws. I think that's really important. Now, because people have flaws. They're not all hunks and, and gorgeous, gorgeous people. And that's what the mass market people, a lot of them are.
And I find even, I read, like the only things I do besides keeping my children alive are read and write. And I read a lot, and I find that even when a lot of traditionally published books now are willing in the romance genre to get away from this perfect looking heroine, they're still not deviating from that perfect hero. And I think there's definitely, like, it's definitely good that they're moving at least on one side of the coin. Like that is still important. But like I don't know, when I wrote Maggie, I knew she'd be polarizing. I knew there were going to be people that really, really loved her and really understood where she was coming from and like really understood her story and her thought processes and like why she does what she does. And there were going to be people who are going to look at her and be like, why is she so weak? Why is she so like annoying? Why is she so needy? Because I think a lot of times in the romance world, we either have the heroine that needs to be protected in like classic romance, or we have these strong females. And there's nothing wrong with strength at all. But I like the idea of challenging what it means to be strong, because needing help or having tunnel vision or not recognizing something directly in front of you, I think we all would like to think that if we were the heroine, we would see things, but we don't always. And I wanted to be sure that I wrote characters that were realistically flawed, that they have these nuances that are real. And
Mhm.
sometimes I worry, well, I was a little worried that in a traditional publishing setting, there would be more focus on what that would not do for the book than what it would do. Um, and like I said, I have friends who are traditionally published who have stories about being asked to change things or told that things wouldn't work. Um, and who knows where down the line that came and what would have happened if they'd stuck to their guns or when they didn't stick to their guns and felt they needed to. As a debut author, I don't feel like you always I don't feel like I would have had the strength to be able to say like, nope, I'm not changing that. Um,
Mhm.
to a big publisher or an agent or someone willing to take a chance on me. So it made more sense to do it myself.
Uh-huh. That's interesting. So, was there a character that you really loved or hated?
I think my favorite character in this book to write is Maggie's best friend, Audrey. She's more of that like classic strong heroine we think of. She's smart, she's strong, she's fiercely protective, and sometimes she doesn't know how to balance out protecting more than one person and how to support more than one person between her brother, her best friend, um, her boyfriend's older brother who is head over heels in love with her best friend. There's all these mixed up relationships, and she's in the middle without being in the middle and trying to balance all of them and help all of them while letting them make their own mistakes. um, and I think it was fun getting into her head and realizing that she's the type of friend I think we all would want to have, someone who is wildly caring, wildly supportive, with our best interest at heart, but still lets us mess up. And then when we mess up, instead of saying, I told you so, just says, what do you need? How can I help? Um, so she was really fun to write. Um, I really enjoyed her. I really enjoyed her relationship with each of the pieces of the book. And then oddly enough, despite needing her to be the way she was, the character that sometimes I got the most frustrated writing was my main heroine, because she is. There are moments where, as the author, I know what she's supposed to see, and letting myself write her into the corners that she needed to be in so that she could make the leaps and grow the way she needed to grow was frustrating, because I wanted to be like, you can see it, you can get it. Um, but she did, like, she as a character on her own wouldn't have. So sometimes she took an extra minute to relate to and to calm down with, and that is as someone who thinks the way she thinks and responds the way she responds.
Hmm, okay. So what else can we expect from you in the near future?
So my second book is releasing at the end of February.
Oh,
So that's coming up soon. And then my plan is to do two more in 2023. So hopefully one in the early summer and one at the beginning of the fall. And then possibly a holiday novella. I have an idea percolating. It'll depend on if it gets written. So
wonderful. So we should expect quite a bit from you this year.
hopefully. I spent a lot of time this past year writing, so I have a lot of stories drafted and ready to go. And now that I feel like I figured out the publishing side of it, it makes sense to go back through and prepare them and set them free. So,
Great. Now questions about you as a writer.
mhm.
What's your favorite part of being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
Um, I like physically holding my book. I think that is something nothing prepares you for. And I'm sure a lot of people would say this too, but I absolutely love when I get emails or messages from people who have read what I've put out there and that there's something in particular that they relate to and felt the need to contact me about. It doesn't happen a lot. I mean, like, I'm not Colleen Hoover, like setting the world by storm. But I do get a fair number of comments, especially on characters like Mac or Maggie and people who haven't seen themselves fully represented before in some way, or who highly relate to something that isn't typically in the books they read. And there's nothing better than getting a message that just says, thank you so much for writing this, or like, I really relate to this character. And that's a lot of fun to see. I try very hard to stay out of review spaces for a number of one because like reviews are by readers for readers, not for authors, but also because I know that my own anxiety can't take necessarily the negative parts of it. So it's better for me to just stay away and let someone else kind of track if anything is, if something major is kind of coming up over and over. My husband will relate it to me. So getting those messages sometimes is the only like one-on-one feedback I'm getting from readers. And so it's always nice to get a little message. Very
Mhm.
validating.
Okay. So, what has been your favorite adventure during your writing career so far?
Um, I'm not sure. I think probably meeting some of the people that I've met. I have made some friends with people that I never would have connected with if it wasn't for writing. And now some of those people are hands down some of my greatest friends. And even when it doesn't involve books and writing, they're the people that I pick up the phone and text or call or talk to or make plans to see. Um, and if I'd never branched off into this journey, we would have never like touched base or connected in any way. So I think that has been the most fun is like meeting other people on this journey or in this sphere and seeing that like all of us are doing this a little bit differently, but together at the same time.
Ah, I think the whole social aspect of it is amazing because it's such a solitary career. And when you do get to meet other people, it's great.
Absolutely. And I think especially I think this probably has to do a little bit with everything that the whole world just went through with COVID. But a lot of the in-person stuff that we were doing prior isn't happening anymore. So not only is it a solitary career and pastime, and I work part-time and I'm home with my children, so this is in essence like a third job for me, and I need to fit it in. The writing needs to get fit in when the kids are sleeping or when someone is available to come watch them. And I'm lucky that I have a family and a support system that puts a lot of stock into my writing and is willing to take it on. But that doesn't mean I have full-time childcare so that I can write all day. And so that also then cuts into the time that I would have to be social outside of writing. So it was very important to find a group of supportive people. But because everybody has kind of lost some of that social aspect, like I have friends across the world now that I can talk to. And I think that's just incredible. I have several local author friends that were trying to like come back and be in person more, but I have friends in Australia and the UK. And so that also means that any time of night, it could be 2 a.m. and I'm still up banging away at a plot point that I can't get. There is somebody in my friend group who is awake and available to talk me down off the ledge, and vice versa. When I'm up at 4 because one of my kids is sick, I'm available to whoever needs talking off their own ledge. And I think that's really special.
That's great. So, what is the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your writing career?
I think the greatest lesson, and this is particular for writers, is that you just need to write it down because you can always fix what's on the page. You can always go back, you can always delete it, revise it, change it, rework it. But if you don't have it written, you can't do it. I used to be someone I've written my whole life. I was a creative writing major in college, but I would always get to points in stories when I was writing them where I'd get stuck. And once I got stuck and I stayed stuck for too long, it's like the idea kind of disappeared. And so then I'd put it down, move on, maybe start something new, maybe take a break. But the biggest thing I learned is that even when it's hard, if I know the hump I need to get over and I just get something on the page, I can go back later and it can be like the worst thing I've ever written or like anybody has ever written. But if it's on the page, I can work with it. Um, and so that has been both hard and helpful, but that has definitely helped me bridge the gaps because a lot of times that I'd say that hump comes in like the last third of the book where like you're not quite at that ending that you have in your mind, but you've kind of done all the build up. And that's when I usually start to lose steam. But the reminder that like you just have to get it down, even if it is awful. If it's on the page, it can be worked with. That's been the biggest thing to learn. I've got a cat.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think one of the authors had mentioned that if you don't want to write the details, you could just write details here,
Yep.
and then continue on to the story.
Absolutely, absolutely you can. I know several author friends who say like jump around and write the scenes you want to write. You know, if there's a scene 3 chapters from now that seems more interesting, like you make up the rules. Who's to say you can't jump 3 chapters ahead and write what you want to write? Like there are no rules. You just have to get something on the page.
That's
And
true.
I like that. It's both daunting and comforting at the same time.
So, do you have any other pieces of advice that you'd like to give to other writers?
I think the other piece of advice I would have is that imposter syndrome happens to everyone. Um, you're not doing it right if you're not doubting that you're doing it the right way, or if you're not doubting that it's worth it. And the best way to get through that is to have people who can talk you off the ledge when you think that you've made a huge mistake and perhaps you shouldn't be writing at all, or everybody hates what you're doing. Surrounding yourself with the people that you know aren't going to lie to you, but also aren't going to let you wallow in it. That's the most important. But that, yes, everybody has it. I mean, maybe not like Stephen King anymore. He might have graduated beyond feeling like an imposter. But for the most part, everybody doing this worries that if it's good enough, or if anyone will like it, or if it's worth it. And it is.
Okay. Are there any groups, clubs, or organizations that you'd recommend to other writers that might have helped you with your?
Yeah, so I 100% recommending joining like the social media author groups. I particularly have found a good niche on the TikTok app. I know there's a lot of talk now about whether or not it will continue, but it has been invaluably supportive, and the connections there are wonderful. And then if you are planning to self-publish, there is a Facebook group called 20 Books to 50K. And it is authors in all different genres coming together with tips and tricks from marketing to drafting to selling your book on how to physically create the backlist that will make it a viable career. All the little details from like keyword choice to, the way to pick an editor, where to spend your money, where to save your money, how to pick cover artists. And that is, anytime I have a question, almost every response I get tells me that I can find it there. And then they'll also give me their version of the answer. But they have so much to give that definitely highly recommend that one.
That's great. Okay. Questions about you as a person. What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
Uh, I'm adopted. So that's always a fun fact. Most people don't know it because I look exactly like my mom. So it never comes up really. But yeah, I was adopted as a baby. Some of that is getting explored in a couple of my later books, those plot lines, but it's usually my like 2 truths and a lie fun fact about myself.
Okay. I can imagine that would make great material for the book. Yeah. Okay. What is or are your passions when you're not writing? And how do you make time to do the things that you love?
I don't. I'm not the right person to ask about this one. Mostly because I am a mom to a 3-year-old and an almost 2-year-old. I will let you do the math later on how close in age that means they must be. But it means that I have very little free time. So the majority of my free time is spent writing or reading. And it always has been. I'm much more of a homebody and an introvert and have been my whole life. So those were the 2 main hobbies I had before. Um, but I do a little bit of art here and there to try and, a lot of it relates back to my writing. I can make my own covers if I do my own art, things like that. And right now, a majority of that time happens when my kids are sleeping. So,
It sounds like you're very creative.
yes, I try to be.
Yeah. Okay. So what does your writing space look like?
So, in theory, I do have a desk. Um, you don't want to see it. It doesn't matter. It is downstairs in like a corner of the playroom, and it's beautifully done. Like I have my printer, I have all my work, I have my printed out drafts, I have my calendar, I have a wax warmer, and 99% of the time I write on a lap desk on the couch. Um, especially when I'm trying to fit writing in around the rest of people's schedule. Being on the couch in the family room or in the living room means that my husband is in the same room, even if we're not talking, because I'm writing and he knows better than to get my attention unless he needs to. But at least we're in the same space, and spending that time together. Um, Occasionally it means, yeah, like my kids and my husband can be playing and I can still be in the room with them and still be in their sphere. It is awful for my back and for my wrists, so I'm not sure how long it will work out as a viable writing space. Um, but right now, yeah, I have a little lap desk. I use my iPad mostly, so it has a little case with a keyboard, and I draft there.
And you can actually write with the noise going on?
Oh yeah, I'm very good at blocking out noise. In fact, I do better with background noise than I do with silence. So 90% of the time when we're writing, the television is on. Um,
Oh.
Either because my husband's watching something like Forged in Fire, or it's playing a repeat of some show we've seen together. Or if that's not working for me, I listen to a lot of music.
What kind of music would you listen to while you're writing?
So it depends on what I'm in the mood for. If I'm writing a particular scene, or I know that there's a particular character I'm working on, or that I'm like working around, I'll try and find songs that kind of match the vibe I'm going to. But sometimes I just put on like a shuffled playlist of like radio top hits and kind of let it inspire me. It might not all be to my taste. It might not all be music that I would typically listen to on my own, but I don't have to worry about it. It'll just keep playing, and I don't really listen to it too much anyways. So yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. And do you have any specific foods or drinks that you like to have with you while you're writing?
Yeah, I always have coffee. Almost always have coffee. Mostly because it's usually the first time during the day that I can actually drink my coffee without a small human asking for it. So that's always a big thing. And if it's not coffee, if it's too late for caffeine or I'm just not feeling that, I always have something. I get really thirsty when I'm writing, almost like I'm actually like we call them writing sprints when you just like set a timer and write until the timer goes off. And by the end of those, I'm like panting and ready for a drink, like I've done an actual sprint. So I always need a beverage nearby, but I don't eat anything when I'm writing, mostly because I haven't yet figured out how to eat with no hands. And I need my hands for typing. I will eat stuff if I'm like reading through and editing, especially if I have like a printout and I can have like a pen in one hand and like eat something with my other, then I will. But for the most part, I just sit and write, have a drink. My husband's famous for making me take breaks when he catches me in the midst. He'll be like, "Have you eaten anything in a couple hours? Take a break." So he's really supportive that way.
Oh, great. Now, writers often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions, and do who either help them or hinder them through their work. Do you have any of those, and do they help or hinder you?
I do actually. She was here. She's gone. She was here like 2 minutes ago. We have a cat. Her name is Stella. I'll let you make your own assumptions as to where that connection came from. She's mostly black. We've had her since she was a kitten. We got her, my husband and I got her when we moved in together, um, directly out of college. So I'm not going to tell you how old she is either then. She she never signed on to have one small human in our home, let alone have two small humans in our home. So she spends a good majority of her day not in the same room as us or sitting on a very high ledge and watching them with disdain. So when they go to bed and I sit down to write, she's in my lap, she's curled up next to my legs, she's sitting against my chest. She's very much my cat. So she very nicely, politely stays off of my keyboards so that I can do my work. But she is always there, which is really fun and really special, and definitely influenced my choice of pen name.
I see. Okay, now I have two more questions for you. Where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And I'm going to give a plug like I do for every other video. You can get the trope at Annie's if you call us at 508-796-5613, or you can send us email at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. And where else could people find your books?
So my book is currently available in print at any online retailer and at Annie's Bookstop in Worcester. It is also available through my own website and Etsy shop where I sell signed copies when I have them available, which is not always. And my ebook version is with Amazon. So that is where you can locate those two.
Great. And how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
Yeah, so the best place to do that is to either join me on any of my social media handles. I'm most active on TikTok and Twitter with the handle Stella Stevenson Writes, all one word. I do have a Facebook page, Stella Stevenson Author, although I'm not as active on there. And then there's always my website, which is authorstellastevenson.com. And that one has all my up-to-date, what's going on, what's coming out. My social media is a mixture of teasers from my work as well as talking through my processes and what is going on as I write and work and what's inspiring to me. My website has most of my up-to-date, this is where we are with this work, this is when it's coming out, this is how to find it.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. Okay, well, since you are a local author, you live around the Worcester area, I would hope that one of these days you will come in and we eventually will be having some book signings again, and you'll come in and do a book signing for us.
Absolutely, I'd love that.
Yeah, so we'll probably be starting those hopefully in April. Oh, there's your kitty.
Yep.
Aw. So, Stella.
So yeah, I would be honored to. I would love to do that.
Okay, that would be great. So, Stella Stevenson, appreciate your joining us today, and hopefully we will be seeing you.
Of course.
Okay,
Thank you
thank
so much.
you. Bye.